What's up, everybody? It's Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads. And with me, I have Jake Payne, our editor in chief. And together, this is our What's the Headline podcast. What's happening, man?
Yo, what's going on, man? Happy St. Patrick's Day. I see you got a little bit of green on. I got my green.
No. Well, I mean, yes, but yeah, for sure.
Just some humor for your Friday, man.
No disrespect to the Irish. I got love
No.
for everybody. But you wore yours intentionally for that?
You know what's funny, man? I'm only a little bit part Irish, but that's a tradition my mom started. And later today, I am headed to Chicago, where I've only ever been in the airport of Chicago, I think Midway, on St. Patrick's Day. But I know that that's one of the cities where it's a big deal. That is not why I'm going. But yeah, man, I'm just kind of honoring a tradition my mom started. And, it's not exactly Kelly green, but I got a little flash on.
Yeah. Have you had green beer
You know what's funny?
today?
Oh. Man, let the record show we are taping this at 1:00, and I know my way around a beer, but I have never been a huge day drinker. Once in a while, if there's reason to celebrate, I might have a beer with lunch, but I'm one of those people, man, it makes me tired. And I know, like, you're funny though, because you'll be like, oh man, I love beer. And all the times you and I have had a drink and had a meal or all that stuff together, had drinks. I've only ever seen you drink a beer. I could probably count it on one hand.
I have beer like probably every week, but I do the Belgian beer like on cheat day, like it's a treat for me. So
You go highbrow.
they go low, I go on brow, I go highbrow.
Tonight's the night, so make mine a low and brow. Yeah.
You have had green beer though in your life?
No, you know what's funny? I don't think I have. I went to Ireland in the last year for the very first time. I was there 36 hours in Dublin, and I had my fair share of Guinness, which was a beer that I have to say I've never like loved up until that. And after having it there, man, I don't know, it was just like that's something I've enjoyed, but I don't think I've ever had green beer. Maybe I'll change that this weekend.
Yeah. All right,
I
man.
also don't mess with Shamrock shakes either. That's gross to me.
What is the Shamrock Shake?
Come on, man. From your days of past, as a McDonald's customer, you don't know what a Shamrock Shake is?
Nah, man. Although I gotta tell you, I grew up in Indiana, and my hometown was defined as so average to America, whatever that means, that it was a testing place for McDonald's. So we had stuff way before anyone else did from McDonald's. Some stuff never made it. Like, have you ever had McPizza or heard of McPizza?
No.
There was McPizza,
Was
and
it good?
I didn't try it, dude. Just it was green beer to me, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, nah. So what's a Shamrock Shake?
It's a mint. I think it's a mint vanilla milkshake, and there's people out there. It's like the McRib or something. Like, there's a cult following it has, and I think I've had maybe like half of one in my life, but. I don't love mint chocolate chip ice cream. The only thing I like that's mint is toothpaste and mouthwash. Other than that, nah.
Yeah, I'm the same way, man. Exact same way. Those two things, and that's it. Mint stuff. Well, peppermint, but like.
Yeah, in small doses, man. But how's your week going?
Man, it's been a good week for me, a tough week for hip hop fans, soul fans, actually. We lost another legend this week. Bobby Caldwell died at age 71. Did you listen to his music before finding it through hip hop samples?
There was a period of time when I got really into the Quiet Storm radio, and they would play some of that, but I have to tell you that would have been like 99, 2000. So right around the same time Common's like Water for Chocolate comes out. So it all coincides. So not really.
Yeah. I mean, he is a blue-eyed soul. I don't even. I assume that term is still politically correct. Hope it's not offensive to anyone, but he's someone who really was, has some classic songs. I think in the late '70s, early '80s. What You Won't Do for Love, which Tupac, sampled, and many others on his song Do for Love. Open Your Eyes, which people will recognize from Jay Dilla flipping it for Common's Delight. And then My Flame, which Biggie used on Sky's the Limit.
Clark
But
Kent, yeah.
man, great, great classic soul songs. In fact, I use that term, but a lot of people didn't realize that he was white. Even until he died. But most people, I think, if they heard the record, assumed he was black. Just very, very soulful.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, he fits into that like era and style of music that really defies genre, because part of it is soul, part of it arguably is R&B, part of it is in jazz. And I just love that period of music, and we're seeing that being sampled more and more. And one thing I didn't realize is that those three songs that you mentioned were independent hits. And I know that obviously the radio system and the label system were different in the late 70s and early 80s, but he was somebody who played in bands, got his real first kind of teeth coming on with Little Richard, I believe playing guitar, if I'm not mistaken. And then moved into that. And, all of his album covers, I always was rocking the fedora. So, yeah, that was sad. That's younger than both of my parents. So that one's eye-opening for me.
Yeah, man, for sure. Rest in peace to him, to his fans, family, and friends. But yeah, his music will live on. So, in other news, there's been a little bit of back and forth. We did a detailed podcast last year about the rift that's developed between the members of Slaughterhouse, specifically Joel Ortiz and King Crooked released a project last year. Well, they really detailed. It was called The Rise and Fall of Slaughterhouse. Just the arc of that group, how they came to be, some of the drama that happened behind the scenes, and more importantly, the drama that happened afterwards has prevented them from reuniting. And recently, King Crooked and Joe Budden kind of got into it. You want to break that down a little bit?
Yeah. Joe Budden has been, using his podcast platform. And let's not forget, we are now in the 7th year since Joe has been a professional rapper. He put the Rage and the Machine album, and then really just stepped away and went full on into TV hosting, podcasting, reality television, being just like an all-encompassing media man. And, Joe, one of the reasons I think he's been so successful is that he's unfiltered. And somebody who I'll say is a listener of Joe's podcast, he's given some criticism to over the last 4+ years, is Logic. And, this week, Joe, and I should say this month, Joe urged Logic to retire, which is an interesting choice, because those have been following Logic is somebody that, like Budden, has taken time away from rap. And this is what he said. He goes, "Logic, I beg of you, I'm pleading with you. Please join me in retirement. Never step near a recording device again. Throw your phone in the ocean. Be allergic to microphones. Promise your fans nothing. Don't go to the studio ever again. You are the worst, yo. You are really, really bad." And to bring it back to your point.
Yeah, and this was in response to Logic released a cover of Ice Cube's "It Was a Good Day," and it was definitely a one where he took creative license. It was an acoustic performance with guitars, and he basically sang it in almost like an adult contemporary version. Like, it was
very Bobby Caldwell. Yeah,
it was, yes, yeah, it was definitely far from the version that Cube released.
It was so much so that Cube's own son, O'Shea Jackson Jr., who heads may remember playing Cube in the Straight Outta Compton film, whether joking or whether looking for kind of a viral jab, made reference to Logic talking about his mother this way, in the lyrics of the song, which, hip hop heads know that Ice Cube, the day kind of moves with some it starts with breakfast and some romantic endeavors later on. And I never really never took that to mean that that was Cube's, I guess, now wife and mother of his children. But interestingly enough, Budden says that. And Crooked Eye, and let's not forget, Crook is somebody who spends a great deal of time, and AFH's accounts engage with it, asking, I think, very thoughtful, very music forward questions about rap and hip hop online. And Crook said, "Why does dude hate Logic music so much? Serious question. It's some rappers I wish would retire way before Logic." Which kind of, like you said, fan the flames, and Crook and Joel just put out another project. But yeah, I think that it kind of beckons a larger question, don't you think?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to explore, do you think that Budden's problem is with Logic's music or with Logic himself?
I think a bit of both, and in the years that I've listened steadily to Joe's podcast, he's accused Logic, and obviously I'm paraphrasing, and Joe and his team could disagree, but of pandering at times. Logic has done things and kind of had moments that enter the zeitgeist of discussion, and Joe has been very critical of his motives in that at times. And I think that this really started after the Everybody album in 2017, which was a real pivot point for Logic, despite having a world of success that, of course, I think most fans will remember. Logic and Alicia Cara and Khaled put out what I would call the suicide prevention song, which was titled after the Hotline number, which was Grammy nominated for Song of the Year. And Logic found a new level of success, arguably a decade into a career that began, very DIY. And Joe had questioned that and some series of Logic's moves around that. I think in addition to some commentary on the music, but more than anything, if you had to choose between the two, I would say it was more about the man than the music.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. Logic I've found to be extremely polarizing. And, I've had conversations with very respected people in hip hop who have expressed similar kind of like discontent with Logic. You and I joke about it, but I know that at times he's rubbed you the wrong way as well. And I want to talk about it. So there's a lot of different layers here, in my opinion. So first of all, there's the one about commercial success versus more kind of like underground. To your point, Logic came from a very underground tradition. He released, several mixtapes, kind of cut his teeth and built up his fan base that way. And we'll get into that in a little bit. And then at a certain point, made some music that crossed over. Back since like the days of MC Hammer and Young MC and even Beastie Boys, like there's been sort of this chip on the shoulder of certain folks when people make music that people believe is designed to cross over to the mainstream. Let's talk about that first. Why do you think that is? I think is it because people aren't being authentic and they're doing something that's calculated and like either watering down the culture or making it, more accessible to other audiences than those who typically gravitated toward rap, kind of the way that people say Elvis did rock. And, we've got countless examples of others who've done that kind of thing. You think that's it, or you think it's something else?
I mean, there's a case by case basis, right? Like there's times where I feel like folks have leaned into the formula. Also, there's times where I think that it's been the right message at the right time. And Logic's complicated with that because, I mean, that was, 2 to 3 years after Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, who, again, similar to Logic, but in a different way, had been kind of bouncing around the independent music scene, arguably the underground, coming from, I would say, a third or a fourth level market in Seattle. Logic is from, Gaithersburg, Maryland. And then they made, Same Love, and they made Thrift Shop. They made these songs that were very different, in my opinion, from what they had before. And it worked. And they had a system around them. And Logic is tricky because, he came in very meat and potatoes rap. And we'll talk about that in a second. But 5, 6 years after I first heard him, he makes a song that is very impassioned and very positive. But it's the one that cuts through the top. If you listen to the rest of that album, there's moments that have Chuck D and Black Thought on a song. There's moments that are very 3 6 Mafia inspired. So it's just a matter of what really kind of catches the wave in the machine and goes up. And I personally, in a lot of cases, don't fault the artist for that, especially if they're an artist that isn't an overnight sensation. There have been times, I think, Vanilla Ice, Ice Ice Baby, and you mentioned Hammer, but Hammer's even a tricky one because Hammer had been kicking around for 4 to 5 years before You Can't Touch This. But yeah, that's I'm not deflecting, but I do think it ranges between artists and songs.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think that the point where you were going is that this isn't necessarily always on the artist. A lot of times I think record labels kind of have a plan in mind, a strategy for how to reach people. They want to go lowest common denominator to reach the biggest audience. They've invested a good deal of money, and so they want a return on that. And we see it with a lot of artists. We saw it with Wiz Khalifa, your hometown. When Black and Yellow came out, that was a really big departure from what you heard on Kush and OJ. And definitely kind of affect. I didn't like that song because it felt too nursery rhymey, too really appealing to the masses for me. But it's something that people do in order to get paid, and I can't knock that. Ultimately, I think artists are in it for the love, but they're also in it to eat and feed their families and make money. And so it is what it is. I think another. So that's one. Let's put a pin in that. The commercial versus underground. I think another issue for people is Logic's appearance. Logic, a lot of people did not realize is biracial because he has, blondish hair and blue eyes, and himself has marketed himself as looking like a young Frank Sinatra. And at the same time, he has over the years leaned into his biracial identity, particularly the Black side, and used the N-word like rampantly and like really been super focused on that. I think that, and still he benefits potentially, some people might think that he benefits from his appearance of looking white. Do you think that that's part of it too?
That's a tricky one, especially coming from me. I don't know that I can speak on that. What I can say is, hip hop and rap are cultures that we celebrate unlikely figures. You and I recently, did a really cool 20-minute piece. It ran on this podcast platform on the evolution of Biggie in terms of fashion sense. And in that, there's reference to Big being, big, black, and ugly as ever. And Big became a rap superstar who was overweight, had a lazy eye, very dark complexion. And we celebrate that. And Logic came in and, I sent you a clip because it made me laugh and you teased me about Logic's appearance. But there's a comedian, Meki Leaper, who bears a resemblance to Logic. He's Moroccan, in part. And he made the joke of like rappers not looking cool anymore, and why he couldn't look like a quote unquote rapper. And I think there's a bit to unpack there because Logic in the last 10 years, if you were to see him on the street, you might not think, oh, this is a rapper, especially of his level of success. And I'm not just talking about, melanin or complexion or anything like that. I mean, just the glasses, the haircut, the shirts, the favoring of video game culture and all of that. He is just a very different type of person. And then to what we're also talking about, what he speaks about is often very different too. And he's very, I think, on one hand, a huge hip hop fan, but on another, super approachable and will write songs about anti-bullying or suicide helplines, different things. And you mix that into a perfect storm of somebody who, whether we're talking about Joe Budden or we're talking about your old Droog, who once used to put a photo up of Rachel Maddow and said that this is Logic, like making fun of his appearance. That's the perfect storm of hip hop making fun and poking fun at somebody like this. So I think that, image is a huge part of it, is my short answer.
I think image is a huge part of it, but I also think it goes beyond what you described as the conventional look. I do think that people place importance on how he presents racially. I'm not saying that I do, but I do think that other people do. And I think that some people believe that that played a part in his success. If he had released that song, the suicide prevention song, but looked very different, I think people think that that might not have had the same success that it did. So there's that. Let's talk. Okay, so but let's really kind of dive into it. And first of all,
Okay.
let's set the stakes for where we are with
Mhm.
Logic. I'm a huge fan of Logic's music. I have been for a long time. I think I first started to dial into him in around 2011 or so when he released his Young Sinatra mixtape. I put him on in the back room in BET's freestyle, like I was, a champion of him on that level as well. And we've supported him throughout our tenure at AFH, both in terms of editorial pieces, and he is always a presence. Like I'd say a fixture on our Spotify playlist. There's like 2 or 3 songs on the playlist now from his new album, College Hill.
Coach
Um,
Park.
or College Park, yeah, sorry. Going back to BET there. College Park. So I'm a big fan of Logic, probably more so than most. That being said, though, I'm not afraid to take an objective look at people and like examine, some of the things that might appear to be a little bit off as well. But what about you? We joke about it, but would you say you're a
Yeah.
Logic fan or no?
Yeah, I mean, I would to a degree, and there's definitely one of the things I like the joke, but I think sometimes I've been misrepresented on this podcast. Like I wake up and I'm like Logic, and I'm putting pins into a voodoo doll.
You
Um,
are.
no, man. 2011 in the late summer, possibly early fall, I came across the Young Sinatra single, the music video, which was recorded to a beat based around Milk Bones' "Keep It Real" and also Life's a Bitch by Nas and AZ. And 2011 was a really interesting time, especially in mixtapes. You had Big Crit making his second straight what I would consider classic mixtape in Return of Forever. You had Mac Miller had made Kids and the whole Lord Finesse thing. Like you had a lot of really talented MCs that were stepping forth, showing their fandom for a bygone era of hip hop and kind of reviving it at a time when auto-tune and R&B rap was really winning at radio. So I saw that and I saw Logic and I was just enamored. And then the fact that an artist calling themselves Young Sinatra and having a team around him called the Rat Pack seemed like a really bold move. Like that's not especially cool to me, and that's not especially like what I expect to see in a rapper. So I covered it at the time. I was the editor-in-chief of Hip Hop DX, and we covered it, and then we
Did you
quickly
did you know he was biracial at that time?
No, I don't think so. I don't think
Mm.
so. And it's funny, even that video, if I rewatched it this morning, but as we prep for this, I revisited a lot of Logic content. I think it's black and white and then switches to color. No, did you, when you discovered him in
No,
2011?
I assumed he was white. I mean, it was Young Sinatra, right? Like, so that to me was, pretty strong
Yeah,
indication.
and correct me if I'm wrong with the artwork to that, mixtape, which would have been, online. I never had a physical copy, but it was that classic shot of young Frank Sinatra, right? Like it
Yeah,
might
the
even be a
mugshot.
mugshot where,
Exactly. Yeah.
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 I was in Jersey City last weekend and I saw that for sale in a few of the windows in town. But yeah, I was taken, and then here's what blew me away. So we covered him on DX, and then quickly after that, I was like, yo, like I listened to some more songs as they came out. And I reached out, I think through our social media team at the time, and found Logic's manager, Chris. We interviewed him. And what blew me away, because especially in that time, I was studying a lot of real-time traffic. Logic had a massive fan base. Like as a guy who I literally went from never hearing before, when he shared something, I don't know if it was Facebook or Twitter at the time, or like our traffic went nuts. And I'm watching this guy who goes from unknown to me, who's clearly been putting in work. And there's plenty of other artists that do that, but that was so fascinating as somebody who studies this music, and obsesses over it.
Yeah, and to your point about there being a bunch of artists back then who were celebrating the people who came before them. Logic has been true to that like since day one. Like not
Mhm.
only beat selection, but he is almost to the level of the game. A person who will shout out other artists and incorporate them in his rhymes. He unabashedly talks about how he wanted to be Kendrick and Cole and people like that, but then also, what a dream it is for him to rap with Wu-Tang Clan and and other heroes of his. And to his credit, he's been someone who over the years hasn't just talked about it, but has actually brought artists who are at different points in their career back onto his platform and potentially expose them to a whole different audience than they would have had he not done so. So he's not only talked the talk, he's walked the walk in terms of like celebrating legends.
That is very real. And that's one of the places where I think AFH has celebrated Logic. Just even recently, he has a new song with Redman. It's Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy, another kind of unlikely choice to put on a song in Static Selecta. We covered it. It's on our playlist right now. And that is, somebody mapping out a high level collaboration. Let's not forget, Logic brought the surviving members of Wu-Tang Clan together on a song and called it Wu-Tang Forever. That fandom drips in his music, and it's palpable. And I think you make a really great comparison in the game, because when the game came on the scene, it made me as a hip hop fan really relate to a guy who was shouting out Cool G Rap and MC8 and King T and the different things that he did. But after a while, with Game and with Logic, I ask myself, is this too, not gimmicky, because I don't know that there's a huge upside to it, but does it start to feel like fantasy camp rap?
Or calculated?
Yeah. And again, the game is a great comparison ground, because there's times where Logic will sometimes be a bit of a chameleon, and I think lean into a style that he really likes. And to me, it's really cool to watch Black Thought, rhyme like Kane in one verse and rhyme like G Rap in another, or to have that I'm Every MC version where he goes through. But on a consistent basis, if you are chasing, that's where I kind of get a little lost. And I will tell you that Logic has been guilty with me. I'm just like, you know what? If you want to rhyme like Kendrick, I'm gonna go listen to Kendrick Lamar. If you want to go make an imitation 3 6 Mafia song, you did it very well, but I'm gonna go pull out Mystic Styles and listen to 3 6 Mafia.
Yeah, yeah. So on this latest project, College Park, it's very much a throwback to Logic's days of old. He's reminiscent of, when he was first grinding. He talks about like even when he was like he talks about like when he was like it starts off with a dream, a song. He wakes up and he says that he had a dream that he had the RZA on a song with him. He was rapping with RZA and he couldn't remember any details of it, but that's what it was. And of course, we know that he ended up fulfilling that. I think they've partnered a couple times, right?
Yeah, I believe certainly on the Wu-Tang Forever, but yeah.
Yeah. So, first of all, he's still doing concepts, and that's just something we talked about before. Like, the notion of an album is kind of falling by the wayside in a world of streaming where like everything is about playlists and not necessarily putting things in order, but customizing your own music experience. He believes in the art of crafting an album. I'd say that he and Kendrick and Cole are probably the leaders of the current school with that in terms of hip hop. There aren't a ton of people who do it. And on Wake Up, which is the second song on the project, he raps, the outro of the song says, and on a beautiful, well, actually, Logic raps about how music saved him from the path of life and violence and crime. And he raps literally, had a gat in my hand, but I didn't want to be that man. And then the outro of the song sets up the album's concept, and it says, on a beautiful autumn day in 2011, Logic and his best friends drove through the slums of College Park in a Chevy Impala around the streets of Prince George's County, cruising through an unknown universe, beginning a journey that would inevitably alter the course of not only their own, but the lives of millions of people around the world. So, the entire song is about how he could have chosen a different path. It was all around him. It alludes to him kind of doing dirt and then choosing not to do so, and then focusing on music and taking him to places well beyond where he could have ever dreamed he could be. And so what I thought we could do is kind of go back to 2011, which is when that Young Sinatra mixtape dropped, and look at what Logic was talking about back then on record versus what he talks about on College Park and what he talked about before that or subsequent to the Young Sinatra mixtape on other projects, to really take a look and see if they align, because I think part of the problem, and you just said it like really succinctly, is that Logic can be chameleon-like at times, and people believe that he may alter his image. Sometimes he flexes into appearing white, like, claiming himself to be Young Sinatra. Other times he flexes into being black, like talking about his granddaddy Malik, and the biracial part. Sometimes he flexes into being a popular artist and does songs like the suicide prevention song. Other times he's underground. There are lots of things that I think people might see as contradictions within Logic that may feel calculated to some. To others, it's just complexity, the way that Tupac was complex. Tupac, I made a tape called From the Profane to the Profound for Tupac, because Tupac was about partying and drinking and chasing women and all that other stuff. He was also about revolution and philosophy and loving his mom and celebrating Black women. Like, he was all those things. And just as I don't think that people would criticize Tupac as someone who's disingenuous, I think it's worth exploring to see if Logic merits that same kind of respect, or if maybe he is being calculated.
Yeah, not for nothing. I mean, Tupac is, a sacred lamb of hip hop. He's an idol to so many. And then there's other cases of that too. You can look at a Busta Rhymes, a Fat Joe, a Rick Ross. There's a lot of artists whose tone, whose autobiography continues to unwind, who go through these periods. And I totally agree with what you're saying. But yeah, it's a great question. Is Logic, somebody who panders and is a chameleon, or is he somebody who's just unwinding all of these different colors in the spectrum of his artistry?
Or is he evolving too, right?
Yeah.
And to the point about, chameleons, like Kendrick himself has said that he's more Kodak Black than I forget the line.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So suggesting that he's not like a prophet, like don't put him on a pedestal, he's just, a regular dude. But like Jay-Z is a perfect example of someone who's evolved, right? Jay has talked about selling drugs like the first 5 albums of his career, and he evolved to talking about hanging Picassos on his wall and buying buildings and making investments. And people were like, yo, why are you talking about that? Because that's the place in his life where he is. I think with Logic, though, he kind of goes back and forth, on these things, even like at this point in time. So, I guess what I want to do is figure out, do we believe that Logic is truly a chameleon and doing so in a calculated way, or do we believe he's complex and just articulating different parts of his life at different times?
So Young Sinatra, you say you want to take it back to 2011, and you talked about that body of work. And you re-listened to it ahead of this episode, yeah?
Yeah, re-listened to it, and more importantly, I read through every single lyric for every song, because a lot of times you don't catch everything. And I wanted to make sure that we were being true to him and not misquoting him and things like that. So I wanted to just kind of do an objective look back. So again, College Park is meant to talk about Logic when, back in 2011, before he made it big. And, he's talking about had a gat in my hand, but I didn't want to be that man. So the first lyric that he raps on Young Sinatra is, the first song is called One. And he says, it was all a dream just a year ago, busting tables and serving food, but y'all don't hear it though. And so he starts off establishing himself on this project, at least, as like an everyday dude who was just hustling, waiting tables or bussing tables, like working in a restaurant, like, your average everyday person, in order to make a living, and throughout the project, the consistent theme, in multiple songs is that he was always laser-like focused on becoming a big rapper. Like that is documented throughout the song, and we'll talk about some lyrics of that in a few minutes. But he goes on to rap on this same song, One. Now I'm on another level, but y'all ain't near it though. My soul bleeding on the track, so spiritual. It's a blessing because now rapping is my profession, yo. Set to detonate. I'm just waiting for my time to blow. And then, he talks about race for the first time, but he just hints at it. He says, white boy at first glance, but when I rhyme, they know. Race don't mean a effing thing the second that I flow. So on the one hand, he's giving a kind of wink that he's not white necessarily. But then in the next line, he says race doesn't even matter. So he's not like leaning into any particular like racial ethnicity at that point either. So a little bit, conflict there. And then, later in the song, he says something that I think starts to sound a bit contradictory to that line from College Park. He says, I was around drugs and gats, but never delved in crime. Had other things in my mind, so I began to grind. And that line, it aligns with everything else that follows on this album. So, when you hear that line, does it conflict to you with the first line from Wake Up?
Yeah, a little bit. And I think there's grace. I mean, I always hear Dr. Dre in my mind going, and I don't smoke weed or cess. And then boom, 4 years later, you have the Chronic. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a shifted narrative. But here's what I'll say about the more recent version on College Park is, Logic is obsessed with comic books. He's penned memoirs and novels, from what I understand. I think that this is a case of like, yo, let me tell you a captivating story. But I'm going to listen to the 2011 version and say, okay, this is your real reality versus the 2023 version of I'm going to go back and maybe intensify things a little bit. But I do, as a step back, say, I don't love that disconnect. And I know so many other rappers are guilty of it. So many other MCs, you can go one by one, some of the names we've mentioned, but that one is a little jarring to me, yes.
Yeah, I love that analogy of like, and listen, like we're all guilty of it, right? We embellish the past, we don't remember it, crystal clear 2020. But to your point, I think that the real time distillation of what your experience is often is the truest one. But, to that, I'll say that there are caveats. Some people come out of the gate when it comes to revealing their bios, other people do it like, over time. So, people who did it out of the gate, Jay-Z did it out of the gate with Reasonable Doubt. Like it was like a journal, it was like a complete distillation of everything that he did in the streets, right? He did it for the streets. It was talking about what he did in the streets, and that was it. 50 Cent, same way, talking about like his life in the streets and, being shot 9 times and all the things that we know about 50. Kanye, I would say, is the same way in the opposite direction, right? Kanye chose to say, listen, I was not in the streets. I was wearing backpacks and polos.
So working at Gap.
Exactly, working at the Gap. Like this was my reality. And so those are some guys who did it right out of the gate. Other people, I think, kind of had it trickled out like over time. The two that come to mind for me, and you probably know others, are J. Cole, is one. And Kendrick is another one as well. Good Kid, Mad City, a lot of people know was Kendrick's first album, or depending on how you define Section 80. But he saved that. He deliberately saved, the story of his childhood and his coming of age period for his debut album. There were other mixtapes and things like that talked about other things, but he was very intentional about not revealing certain things until that particular project. But can you think of other examples like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. I'm thinking again of Rick Ross. I mean, Rick Ross came out with Hustlin' and said, I know Noriega, the real Noriega. And then that was 2005, 2006, if I'm not mistaken. And then right around 2007, 2008, people came out and said, wait a minute, you were a correctional officer. And you look at that, and Rick Ross has weathered that storm. I mean, that didn't cancel him, that didn't end him. And I think in 2008, a lot of people thought this wasn't going to work. But I think, to your question, I mean, the Kendrick example is incredible because what he did was save enough of a concept and enough of a perspective. Because even, overly dedicated, he had other bodies of work well ahead of that, but he offered a sliver of his life to make a really compelling album, same as 2014 Forest Hills Drive. So those are the two best examples. And one thing I'll add is, Logic is of that same time. I always kind of perceive him as a year and a two behind Drake, Kendrick, and Cole. I mean, maybe that's on us as when we got to know him as fans, but I think that part of it is what he's doing is always trying to nudge his way into that class. And maybe that's why you get some of these disconnects. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. And so let's move to another song, right? So there's a song called Shine On, which is early in the project as well. And on this one, he gets a bit more specific. He says, now I've accepted I'm not from the hood, because selling crack and busting gats don't make my raps good. Now, I see you shaking your head.
That's not him riding around PG in the Impala, looking for the jucks.
Yeah, that's very different. He's absolutely refuting that lifestyle and refuting people who he's actually making a commentary on people who use that for their music, saying like, listen, like it's a crutch. You don't need that. Like that's not what I'm about. And so that to me seemed like a direct contradiction to Wake Up. And so, again, we can attribute it to fuzzy memory, or, there's an open question, or is it calculated?
Yeah, big time.
So let's go, though. It gets really interesting because there's a skit called Sellout Records. And on this skit, he's making fun of rappers who change their stories to gain popularity, right? Yeah. Which is exactly the conversation we're having about whether he's doing, right? And so there's this fake record executive named Marty Randolph who calls him up. He's noticed that Logic has a buzz. It sounds very much like the way you did at DX. Like he noticed he has a buzz.
Call me Marty Randolph? Okay.
I don't know, man. And a fan base. He's like, yo, we got to capitalize on this, right? So he says, so this is Marty Randolph. Basically, okay, everything that compiles you, the whole young Sinatra smooth intellectual lyrics, the realism of who you are and how you project that, everything that you do with your music. So this is him, like, Marty Randolph acknowledging that, he's young Sinatra, that Logic is smooth and has smart lyrics, and, he's real in his songs. So, again, Logic is saying that this of himself effectively. Logic says, yeah, man, thanks. I'm glad you spotted that out. And then Marty Randolph says, basically what we're going to do is get rid of that, okay? We want to put you in the limelight with a bunch of bees and popping bottles because nobody cares about that stuff. So that's fascinating, right? Like, in the context of this is Logic saying who he is and using someone else to show how the industry's trying to get him to be something that he's not in order to be popular.
Yeah, to mold him.
Yeah. And to your point, you think that Logic's music in the future maybe evolve to do just that to some degree, not in the terms that Marty is asking for, but in other ways.
Yeah, I think Logic's somebody who watches what's going on around him and wants to try his hand at it, in terms of beat selection. And let's not forget, Logic is a great producer. But, we've watched producers create beats that sound like other producers. And I think he does it with flows. I think he does it with content. And there's just hey, I can do it too. And he does it very well. But, I know we're saying in that case, but yeah, the Marty Randolph character is interesting to look back at a dozen years ago, because Logic, even though he's been a major label star, has been, from what I understand, very much in the driver's seat of his own marketing and image. So yeah, just interesting prophecy there.
Yeah. And so then, on a song called On Prime, he starts to really dive into and just solidify. He wasn't about that life, that crime life. He was really about trying to do everything he could to succeed as a rapper. So on Prime, he raps, Yeah, in high school, I wasn't worried about them A's and B's. I was trying to make the flow unkillable to obtain these G's. And then he goes on to say, because nobody made it in the game out of where I'm coming from. Can you feel me? Me and my team devised a scheme to get the cream. So he's saying here that, and he said this throughout the project, that he was very strategic. He was very intentional about chasing success and finding success in rap music. So I don't know. That's in deep contrast to me to some of the things that are presented in that college part opening. Wake up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one thing I'll shoot Logic a bit of bail is we all know that somebody can, when I talk about my past or you talk about yours, there could be outlier years or seasons. We've watched Jay-Z go from, the lyricist that you hear on those records with Jaz-O to, wow, he's somebody who's moving around East Trenton doing these other things that you later, you don't hear that Jay-Z story until Reasonable Doubt, really. You still get, the stutter step flow up until really you hear Dead Presidents, in those 95, 96 records. But I digress. I mean, Logic there could be a period of time between 2011 and 2000 and, him signing his deal where maybe that temptation seeped in more. But that's not for you or I to say.
Yeah, so we've been talking about this throughout in terms of contradiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's contradictory that he doesn't want to sell out and puts a skit about it, but is also talking about how he's doing everything he can in order to achieve commercial success, right? It's contradictory that he declares himself to be young Sinatra, but then kind of tacitly implies that he might not be, he might be of different races. I'm gonna go with a different C word though when it comes to Logic. And I think that for me, this one feels more genuine to who he is. I personally don't think that Logic is like a bad dude and some super calculated person just trying to get over. I think that what Logic is conflicted. And I think that that has been a recurring theme in his music from young Sinatra and probably before, all the way up through this current project. We saw it on songs like Africarian, which is the culmination of Everybody, which is the album where he fully leaned into his biracial identity. And some might say went a bit extreme with it, because on this project, Young Sinatra, I'll note he didn't drop the N-word one single time. There are 22 songs on this entire project. Not once did he drop the N-word. If you listen to Everybody, that album, it is all over the album, right? And so that's definitely a very different presentation than what a young Sinatra person would do. But Africarian, he talks about his ancestors and the difficulties of being biracial. He's not accepted by the white kids because he has Black family. He's not accepted by the Black kids because he doesn't look Black. And at the end, there's a secret song that we found kind of later. That was actually one of the first to report on it, where J. Cole raps to him, and it's just rapping on his phone. It's not even to a beat. It's to a metronome, so he can be on beat. And he's telling Logic, man, you too wrapped up on this, man. I'm also biracial. Just be who you are. Don't let anybody put you in a box. Accept your identity, in whole, and stop trying to, parcel yourself out and lean into one or the other. So it's fascinating. But I will say, on Young Sinatra, there's a song toward the end of the project called Mixed Feelings. And on that, Logic fully talks about his race. He says, perhaps together with an urge to break free of this biracial jail cell, feast my memories, please come and taste this. Papa was a Black man, mama was a racist. Growing up, she called me, this is the only time he uses the N-word. N-word, he says it to make a point. Kids call me cracker. While the whites got whiter and the blacks got blacker, I was hurting, doing everything I can. Perceived as a white boy with the soul of a Black man. Damn, looking up to Malcolm X, studying his speeches, underlining his texts. How can I be white devil if my parents had sex? Because I'm black and I'm white, and I'm proud of every word that I recite. I know my roots, I know my past. I know the issue of my mom ain't gonna last. We all breathe the same air and bleed the same blood. And when we die, the same ditch gets dug. That to me like is like almost like journal writing in terms of like the conflict that he lives every day.
It's poetry. Yeah.
And yeah, it's poetry. And I think that that conflict manifests itself for many different aspects of his life, you know, throughout his life thus far.
Absolutely. And yeah, he said, I think you may have misquoted it. He said, I know the issues of my race ain't gonna last. We all breathe this that like race. And I think that that's so interesting because that was 2011. And, you know, I think some of Logic's biggest trolls or I won't say critics, but people that, you know, stay on Logic's mind as detractors, a lot of it, I think, deals with racial identity and looking at how he's spoken of those issues too.
Yeah, absolutely. So that to me, like, you know, I think sets up a lot of what has defined Logic, you know, throughout his career. You know, like we said, everybody, it becomes more prevalent. I can't remember if on the first album was it Under Pressure.
Under Pressure.
He talks about it a little bit there, right? But not a ton.
Yeah.
But you know, he's leaned into it. Like you know,
During that album, not to cut you off, but during that album, I believe is when 2011, it might have been the second album. They had that, I believe it was Vice or MTV produced that thing where Logic sat on the couch with his parents, and that same thing in Mixed Feelings, like they had that conversation, not about his mom being a racist, but like about the contrast from the experience he had with his mother versus with his dad. And to the, I think, spot on point you made, it showed an artist and a man who was very conflicted.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, to kind of emphasize that point on the last song on the project called Just Another Day in My Mind, he says, I had to face my demons and embrace all my fears while you was out partying, chilling and sipping on some beers. I was sacrificing adolescent years. So again, like this is not him being out in the streets. This is him pursuing his dream with everything it took and making sacrifices to do that. He says, blood, sweat, and tears to find out what music really is. And now I'm feeling like the moment has arrived where Bobby is no longer living and Logic has revived. Like, so that's like the heart of conflict, right? He's not even like one person. He's Bobby and Logic, you know, and I think that he's trying to reconcile multiple identities. You know, so does that speak to you too, or?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it comes in, and you, even down to the way that, you know, he's named some of his projects, you know, on Bobby Tarantino, and this is Logic. And I believe even more recently, he put out a project under a pseudonym. Like Logic is trying to, you know, choose all these identities within himself. And I'm sure at times, again, to your point, those identities conflict.
Yeah. So, you know, 2011, I think paints to me a more full picture of Logic. I think that the 2023 version that's being depicted is one that is almost a caricature of what, you know, he wanted to be at that time. Versus like the reality is he's a complex person with a lot of contradicting and conflicting viewpoints about life, and has gone through a lot of stuff that has influenced him in that way. But it's true to who he is. You know, he is truly a person who, yeah, he may have grown up around some things, but he didn't get involved in it. He stayed out of it. He pursued music to the fullest. He wasn't comfortable using the N-word except to emphasize a point, you know, with his mom. He was identifying as young Sinatra, but, you know, also conflicted about that because, you know, that's leaning into something that he was being criticized about in his family. And, you know, I think he's kind of working through things as he goes with this project and continue to do so for multiple albums. So I can see how from standing back and looking at it, especially if you don't dive deeply into his career and his catalog, that it might seem like this guy is all over the place and just doing what he can to get fame. And he's even suggested that he might do that. But to me, I don't think that he has. But what's your kind of final thought on it?
Yeah, I mean, It's just tricky. I love authenticity, and I think that Logic is being who he is, but I wish that he was a little bit smarter reading the room. You personally, through our work together at AFH, convinced me really what a special album Everybody was in 2017. And that obviously contains Logic's biggest hit, 8 times platinum, and that's just domestically. But where Logic lost me is less than a year or less than 2 years after putting that song out. He made fun of it himself. He had a line on a song with French Montana and ASAP Rocky where he starts to say 1-800 as in the hotline, and then he said, "I killed that P," women's private parts. And I just thought, like, that's super crass and super cringe. And like, literally, you've kicked all these doors down for yourself only to swing around and make it a punchline. And I believe he's done that other times. And I'm just like, you're still growing up. You're still figuring yourself out. And there's a whole bunch of MCs and artists that I look at and I see that with. But I can tell you that I don't see that in J. Cole. I don't see that in Kendrick. I don't see that in the best of the best. And while Logic is an extremely talented MC and an extremely talented producer, he's topped the charts, been nominated for huge awards, won the plaques. There's a reason why he hasn't reached that other, winner's circle.
And would you go as far as say there's a reason why he's hated? I mean, do you think that plays into it? Like, people don't sense that he's being authentic. And again, the question is it him being inauthentic, or is it him being conflicted? Like, but I can see people perceiving it as inauthentic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of both. Like, I looked at the Ice Cube Good Day thing, and I'm just like, dude, that's cringe. Like, I saw a video of him during a 3-6 Mafia, a Juicy J and DJ Paul concert, and they're performing Slob on My Knob, a classic, and Logic's up dancing on a couch. And this was recently, this was this year, and I look at that and I'm just like, you know what? I'm the type of person in any art, I don't have to agree with everything the artist says, but I do like people that, I can bond with, that I'd like to sit and have a cup of coffee or beer with. And I really appreciate Logic's fandom of hip hop. I think he can flow really well at times. I think he's made some very profound statements. The one you just read, for Mixed Feelings being one early in his career. But there's a lot of times where I'm just like, nah, this isn't what I really want to listen to when I drive around, just being real.
No, I hear you. I don't think it's retirement worthy, which is how we started this, but I can definitely see how some of the things he's done have rubbed people the wrong way. I guess for me, I don't attribute it to being calculated. I just attribute it to him being human, and he likes what he likes, right? I don't think he put out that Ice Cube cover for a viral moment to get attention. Maybe he did, like, who knows? Maybe, like, I'm just way off. Maybe he did that knowing it would get criticism from Budden and other folks, and maybe the album isn't performing the way that he wanted it to. That's a possibility. Because why else would he put that out now? Or maybe he's just like, F it. Like, I don't care. I love Cube, and I'm gonna do something that is funny, that feels good to me, and it is what it is. And he even started it out saying, like, he started it off saying something like that. I'm gonna just do this, and this is what I'm feeling. So,
Yeah, I mean, and we've lived in a time, and I believe that Logic and Chance the Rapper are very much contemporaries of each other. I mean, Chance went viral doing the Arthur song, at his concert. And well, that's not acid rap to me. That's not Juice. That's not the songs of Chance's that I really like. And I think Chance is somebody else who has his share of critics out there and people that have questioned his motives on things. There is an audience for it. And one thing I will say is Logic is very good at, kind of making hip hop exciting to his fans. There's a reason why in 2011, he created sizable traffic the first time I covered him. There's a reason why, he's always, trending on Reddit. There's a reason why he was one of the first artists that I thought that was big on Twitch. Dude is ahead of the curve. I just wish he would, pick his spots a little better.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, we don't know. And there are just some things in life that you don't know. And speaking of which, we got some interesting information about the song You Don't Know from Jay-Z. this week. This has been discussed before, but we got some more details. You wanna break this down?
Yeah, so Just Blaze did an interview with my man Noah and Idea Generation, which is a great, video and audio podcast that, speaks to creators and thinkers and folks in music, out of music, in fashion and cooking and a host of things. And Just Blaze was the perfect conversation. And, he brought up the fact that You Don't Know was originally a beat. And we're talking about the joint from Blueprint. I would consider absolutely one of Jay's 10 best songs. Would you agree with me on that?
Oh man, that's a really tough question. Like
Okay.
Jay's got so many bangers. Like I
I'll
think
say it.
one of his 30 best songs. He's got. I mean, Jay-Z concerts, like it is nothing but hits, and he could play 40 songs. So yeah, it is one of his best songs, but that could be 40 or 50.
Yeah. I'll put it in mine all day long as a top 10 joint. And, Just Blaze revealed that beat was originally shopped to Busta Rhymes as well as Prodigy. And Just has said this before. A lot of his breakthrough moments in 2001. I mean, the Blueprint, for being an album that I firmly believe brought Jay to a different level, especially at that time in his career. It absolutely made Just Blaze one of the household, producers, just somebody who was a name brand producer, and Jay had a lot to do with that. And then in the years that followed, we watched Just produce, and we can go through the list of just, hits for Fabulous, for Fat Joe, Mano, T.I., the whole Rockefeller family, Dipset, State Prop, all of that. But let me ask you, I mean, that beat, which I can hear in my head as we talk about it, it's that good. How do you think that track would have measured up with a Busta or with a Prodigy?
I think so. I can hear Busta on it like easily, and I think Busta would have absolutely smashed that beat. It goes back to the conversation we had last week about Grandmaster Melly Mel saying that Busta Rhymes was greater than Jay-Z. You can go back and take a look at that, and it's an end-up discussion. I don't think I'd land. I think that Mel was talking more about performance than necessarily records. But because I think Jay has been given better production over the years. To your point about Just and Kanye and even Bink and like even just the people on the Blueprint album. So if Busta had this type of production, a top 10 level Jay-Z beat, then I think he would have just destroyed it, as he tends to do on these kind of records. I have a really hard time hearing Prodigy on this record. Prodigy to me shines on, generally speaking, darker, kind of more sinister, laid back beats. I think about what I believe to be some of his best work on, the Infamous, and a lot of that music kind of fell into that. There's obviously exceptions like Keep It Thorough and others, but you don't think about Prodigy as being on club bangers necessarily. I do think, though, that had he been on this, it could have potentially showcased a different side of him. And who knows, man, it could have altered the trajectory of his career. Like literally, it would have been, I think, in heavy mixtape rotation. It could have been a breakout performance for him in a different lane than he typically was. So what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a really good point. And in 2001, when that eventually landed on the Blueprint, I mean, Prodigy and Mobb Deep were changing a little bit. I just listened to The Getaway by Mobb Deep this morning, and that was a very different sound than what, Mobb had done up until that point. He's a year, I guess, removed, a year or two from, like you said, Keep It Thorough, which still to this day, one of my favorite Alchemist beats. Previously, Just said that, he had heard the Busta, like he knew what that could mean for Busta. And I'd be very curious to know how Busta's going to flow on a song like that. Because I mean, Jay, for as many great flows as Jay has, he has used that song, which was not a single, but it's a statement song. I will not lose. And, talks about stacking his millions and flipping. And, that to me was a centerpiece of the Blueprint of like, no, this isn't just, a star. This is a superstar. And that song, the energy of the lyrics is matched in the beat. So it makes you wonder. And I'm, shout out to Just too, to like talk about these situations where, he was shopping Beats Heavy at that point. But over the course of a few days, I believe starting with Girls, 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 Jay takes special interest in Just. And he even said, and he said this in the 2017, It's the Real live performance, which you were at, right?
I think so. I think I was at that. Yeah.
Eric and Jeff put it on, and Bink was there, and Just was there, and some different, I think G. Roberson, like folks that had worked on that album. And Jay apparently says to Just at one point, "Stick around, I'm going to make you a star." And so Just had to kind of go and pull those beats back from whatever Busta was doing with it and whatever Prodigy was going to do. And there were other beats in that time that went to Ghostface Killah, which I think is just so interesting, because now I think of the Blueprint is such a cohesive album. And in that same interview, just as an aside, Just reveals that, Michael Jackson's vocals are in the Girls, Girls, Girls remix, something that he wasn't even aware of until he kind of, went through his own stems during the pandemic in the catalog. I think he said he was in the basement pulling through. So
Yeah, before we get to that, because I think that's really interesting. There's actually these two things tie together, right? Jay-Z famously referenced Michael Jackson being on the Summer Jam stage in Takeover.
yeah.
Right? He also references Prodigy in Takeover. Do you think that, it's interesting to me that You Don't Know was potentially going to go to one of Jay's rivals at the time. Do you think that helped to like fuel the fire a little bit?
Makes you wonder, because if somebody's kicking, if you think you have something and it ends up in somebody else's hands, that's real. And one thing I'll say, and I think you would agree, is Jay is extremely calculated. So if he's interested in a beat and he knows that it's going potentially to one of his rivals at the time, that's noteworthy to me. Yeah, that's very noteworthy. And just to be clear too, for a little specificity, it was Izzo was for Ghostface Killah, and Ain't No Love was for DMX. Takeover was for Beanie Siegel. Just the origin stories behind some of those Blueprint classics, which again, I think we all immortalize Jay for his ability to just make a moment, and he certainly did that on that album. It's crazy to imagine just the thin line that all of those great songs had from being on somebody else's project, whether they would have been singles or not.
Yeah, I can hear Ghost smashing Izzo, like, bouncing and soulful like that. I can also hear
about to say X.
I can hear X on Ain't No Love. Man, just really, that is like sweet spot for him. That would be crazy.
In 2001 DMX, come on, man. Like, he was crazy. Yeah.
That would have been incredible. So going back to that summer stage, so Michael's vocals are on Girls, Girls, Girls. First of all, I wonder if we'll ever hear that version. That would just be so epic, pun intended. But secondly, I think that I wonder if, because Summer Jam that year was in 2001, June of 28. The Blueprint was released on 9/11 of 01, which, sometimes people forget. I wonder if MJ's vocals were recorded during that weekend when Summer Jam came out, because the timing would align for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've seen that photo, right, of Michael with Dame and Jay. I think Bleek's in it. And it makes you wonder too, especially, to bring it full circle back to Just, the thing that was always crazy about Rockefeller is they had one, sometimes two studios. So they could, if somebody was in town, they could always go and kind of document that moment, like any great label movement, learned. And that's just so powerful. So yeah, it makes you wonder.
Yeah, so hip hop said that it was hip hop, right? Who said that that the Blueprint was basically almost like Just Blaze and Kanye battling each other. Like, Just would come in and be angry that he heard a Kanye beat and want to go back and outdo it. And so it made me wonder, like, who do you think was better on Blueprint, Just Blaze or Kanye? So for Kanye, you got Takeover, you got Izzo, you got Heart of the City, and Never Change. I would say all classic J records. For Just Blaze, you got Girls, 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 You Don't Know, and Song Cry. Also, probably all classic J records, one less. But then, you got PSA on the Black Album, which we both said was maybe top 2 J songs ever.
Yeah.
So like let's broad. Who do you think is a better producer for Jay-Z, Kanye or Just Blaze?
Better producer for Jay-Z, Just Blaze, and PSA is a huge part of that. Even though obviously Kanye and Jay made an entire album together and there's joints on it, I'm still going Just Blaze because of what those records mean to me, and I feel like the doors in the corridor of Jay-Z that they opened.
Mm.
But I certainly would see the other side of that opinion, but for me, I'm going Just. You?
Who? It's a tough one, man. I gotta say, of all those songs, my top three are "You Don't Know," "PSA," and "Takeover."
Well,
PSA probably first.
you're going on the Blueprint question though.
No, just Jay or Kanye versus Just Blaze for Jay, right?
Okay.
So PSA is probably number one for me. You Don't Know number two, and Takeover number three in those three. You know, two being the first two being produced by Just Blaze, the last but by Kanye. But I gotta say, like overall body of work, you know, Takeover is a Heart of the City, Never Change. Girls, 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 and Song Cry were both neither one of those were among my favorite Jay-Z joints. I like them, but they're not at the level of some of those other ones.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tough one, man. This one literally might be a draw for me. And typically I would make that, but I will say this, that the Just Blaze, and like I had an argument with a dude like I worked with back in 2008, 2009, because he didn't know Just Blaze, but he was like loving Kanye and everything that Kanye did. I was like, dude, Just Blaze, like Just Blaze is that guy. And I made him a mix of Just Blaze. And I called it Fire.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that Just Blaze does not get enough credit as a GOAT producer. Like I think that Just Blaze, I would say, is a top 10 producer. And I don't think that people ever talk enough about that. But what do you agree with that statement, first of all?
I think he is an absolutely great producer. I don't know that I would. He's close on top 10. I will say this. I think that on the Blueprint, Kanye has the better contributions. And you kind of articulated this, but Takeover, which is absolutely in my top 10 Jay-Z songs. Heart of the City, which I think is such a centerpiece also of that album, and Never Change, which at this point, 22 years later almost, that's one of the Jay songs on that album that I hold the most dear. Those songs are just incredible records. I will say, and I know this is sacrilege to some, Girls, 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 never my favorite record. I like the video. I like the sentiment. Just not, it's a weak link for me on there. And as much as I love You Don't Know, Song Cry is also, that's in probably my bottom third of that album. And I know the beautiful thing of a classic album is we all like different things. But yeah, I will say, Just has made some of my favorite songs with artists not Jay-Z. I think Safe to Say with Fat Joe is incredible. I think the work that he did on Freeway's first album is some of Just Blaze's best work. A song like Line 'Em Up, which is an album cut, has that ability of rock drums and rock guitars. And, when Just is with an artist with a really booming voice, like a Freeway, like an MOP, Saigon, let's not forget of Come On Baby, like so many joints. Just Blaze is insane. And he is very close to that 10 spot of the top 10, but I don't know that I can say with confirmation, in my opinion, today that he certainly is.
I'm gonna have to send you that mix then, man.
I need that.
So just Jay alone, you got Street, in addition to the Blueprint, you got Streets is Talking, Stick to the Script, Show Me What You Got, which is a top 5 Jay song for me. Hovey
Wow.
Baby, where Just Blaze just goes crazy playing the live drums on that.
Yes.
Somehow, Some Way, another like classic joint for Jay. And then you got the Kanye, Touch the Sky. Speaking of Joe Budden, you got Pump It Up. The Rock, Just Fire, like, from Diplomats is crazy to me. What We Do, Breathe, Fabulous.
Breathe is insane. Yeah.
Free, Compton for Kendrick, and then Freedom, Beyonce and Kendrick is just another, just like he makes epic wall of sound type productions. that just take over and make you want to break stuff. Like he is just, again, top 10 for me for sure, man, for
I
sure.
like the Wall of Sound comparison. The interesting thing about Just is I learned about him because he was, it was in The Source or Double XL or Blaze. They said, you know, there's this producer that's making beats on a two-way, you know, and one of his early hits, I think when I learned his name was, you know, Mac B by Beanie Siegel. And that has that very like, electronic, that sound. And what's crazy is, you know, he finds that pocket even before Blueprint of sampling records. And then he can make, you know, these big like anthems like Live Your Life for T.I. or the joint he did for Mano, All the Above. Like he can do Beyonce records. So Just is insane. I believe he and I share the same birthday. But just a super, super talented dude. And then he does really cool things. One of my favorite like feel good stories we ran back in the day on AFH is, you know, Just catalogs everything. And if you see him DJ, he very likely will play something, you know, a different version of it or something that never released. But he did something that I thought was super cool is, you know, MOP never put an album out on Rockefeller, and a lot of the production was done by Just. And he gave MOP all of those beats and said, do something with these, you know, whether you re-record or whatever. And I think as we talk about Logic and his fandom for hip hop, you watch an interview with Just or you listen to a mix, he also drips with a love of this music and kind of that fan never dying in him. So I think that's super cool too.
Since you mentioned that, I do want to ask you one question before we move on back to Logic. Do you think that he's doing it for the love?
Logic?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, one thing we didn't say about Budden's comment is, you know, when Budden saying retire, please, Logic did retire in 2020. And not even a year passed before he put out his next Def Jam album, which was one of those times, you know, several of us just eye rolled. But I think the reason he came back isn't because he needs the money. It isn't because, you know, he was obligated to a contract. It's because this dude loves to rap and he always feels like he has something to say. And I think like so many hip hop artists, the spirit of competition is in him where he sees a Kendrick, a Cole, a whomever making really good music. And he goes, I want to keep my name a buzz. So,
yeah, no, I think that is without dispute, you know, regardless of what other motivations he might have, I think he truly loves the culture and is doing this for the love for sure.
Big time.
Yeah. So, all right, I'm sending you that mix on Just Blaze. Note yourself on that. So, you know, we talked about Ghostface earlier. There's some new music out. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So this week, Static Selector on social media said, hey, I got something special. I got a song with Raekwon, Method Man, Ghostface Killer, and Inspector Deck, and it's called Unpredictable, and it's going to premiere Thursday night on Funk Flex. And I saw that. I think I called you, you know, as we were talking about some other things, and I was like, Friday, I think we got something special. So the song did come out. It is the first single from Static's 10th album. I cannot believe that. I interviewed you. You and I had Static on this very show in 2020, a really, really good interview that as we talk about Just and Logic, Static's love of hip hop is throughout that interview.
Yeah, and I actually gave him a little bit of static about the fact that, you know, I attended the Lucky Seven listening party. It was in the Sirius XM studios. And Static was very adamant at that point that that was his last album. So I'm very, you know, artists often retire, you know, and then come back. And I'm not mad at that. And I'm very glad that he did come back because, man, like the last album with like Walk On By with, or Keep It Moving with Joey Badass, and then Time with Jack Harlow. Like,
yeah,
it had some absolute bangers on it. So like, I'm looking forward to this. But anyway, continue.
No, I'm laughing, man. You and I retired too in 2020. We thought we were done and we came back. So we you know, we deserve that. But you know what's funny? I am about 5 listens in, and I'll say this about that. What I thought was cool up front is that, you know, Static's been able to pull out a lot of stops over the years, even down to the point you just made of my favorite Jack Harlow verse on Time. But he's never, you know, he'll usually like get an MC from over here or this generation and put them with an MC like Joey Badass and Black Thought on Bird's Eye View. To watch him do, have 4 Wu-Tang MCs in their 30th anniversary year since Enter the Wu-Tang is special. And what I really like too is, I mean, Ray, Meth, and Ghost, those are your 3 hitters right now as far as MCs. Like, let's just be real. Jizza's part of that too, but Jizza is not as, prolific lately as those other 3. What I love about this is he's got Inspector Deck on there. And I will always advocate that Inspector Deck is a great MC. Shout out to Czarface. But if you look at Wu-Tang's classic songs as a group, Inspector Deck carries a huge payload on that, and oftentimes has the first verse, whether you want to talk about Triumph, I believe Protect Your Neck. And he gets the first verse on this. And that again shows some strategy and some thought from a hip hop fan. And Ghostface talks about like 96. He makes a reference to Daytona 500 and being the first artist with a Jesus piece on. Meth, still not cursing on a record, comes in there, talks about how padded his pockets are. He's got the Method Man flow in tow. It's really cool. And it's the first single. We don't know what the album is going to be called. But what's interesting too is Static said, like, you're going to spot some drums in there that are familiar. But he was like, all samples are cleared. I use TrackLib, which is that service that Static is one of the ambassadors of, that's designed to make sampling affordable and accessible.
Yeah, I thought it was dope, man. Static is famous for very soulful beats.
Mm-hmm.
And this, to me, sounded like a bit of a different lane than you typically hear Wu on, especially like with RZA's production, which is much more dark and kind of less melodic. And so it was cool to hear them in that sonic context too, but glad to see that. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Static's got, in the tuck.
Yeah, me too. I mean, he knows how to make a moment, and that's really cool. Just some other new music. We talked about covers. T-Pain, not an artist we cover a lot on the site, has a new album of covering the classics. We talked about Logic's Liberties with Ice Cube. T-Pain covers War Pigs by Black Sabbath. No auto-tune. And I know we can all remember the Tiny Desk concert, but T-Pain sounds like Lenny Kravitz on that. I mean, what he does with his voice, it's really interesting. He covers Journey on there, covers Sam Cooke. For folks out there that are a fan of Teddy, won't say Pendergrass, it's an interesting body of work.
Yeah, War Pigs is wild, man. I first came on that. Ice-T sampled that for
That's right.
Ron Pace, just like and killed it like too. It was really dope. So I downloaded that, the T-Pain, but I got to take a listen to it. Downloaded an acoustic, a new, like, U2 went back and reinterpreted a lot of their classic songs, and I started listening, and I'm a huge U2 fan. And I couldn't make it through the second song. I was like, no.
That's been out for a few weeks though, right?
I thought it came out today.
Okay.
Yeah, but in any case, like, I hope the T-Pain project is a little different than that. I love Michelle Ndegeocello's covers of weird songs, and T-Pain, after that Tiny Desk, I listened to that Tiny Desk just last week. I listened to it at least once a month. So I'm
still might be the best. Something else just to put on the radar of people, Currency, who's done a lot of interesting work with, various producers, i.e. Alchemist, Harry Fraud. Let's not forget the Pilot Talk stuff with Ski Beats. He's been working with Jermaine Dupri, and in theory, that just sounded like, what would that sound like? And we got the first look, at least in officially released form, in a joint called Essence Fest. And Currency is definitely an acquired taste. He can absolutely just like really hit the spot sometimes with his lyricism. Other times I think he's more about just vibe. This was one where I'm more interested maybe in the Jermaine part of it, of like, wow, let's not forget all the So Def stuff. But as we talk about Jay, Jermaine was very instrumental to American Gangster, worked on that album a lot. And I think that he's somebody, at least for Meat and Potatoes rap fans, that, sometimes we look at as more of a songwriter and an R&B producer and a pop producer. But this one, I'm really, I played it a few times, really like the production. I'm eager to hear more, because the folks that I've heard in the space that have heard more of the album have really said it's something special.
Yeah, I gotta listen to it a couple more times. Definitely sounded throwback to me, the beat, very kind of like 80s, very drum intensive, different lane than Currency, because he's another dude who tends to be on more soulful beats. So for him to
Mhm.
go in this less melodic lane is different for him. And I think I was probably expecting that when I heard it. So I'm gonna give it a few more spins.
Definitely. And then just one last note. This is big. I texted you about it, but we finally have music. Mayhem Loren, who we had on the show last year with Derringer, has partnered with DJ Muggs of Cypress Hill and Soul Assassins and Madlib for an entire album produced by those two guys. This is a big deal to me. Matt Muggs, I mean, the guy who made all those joints with Cypress Hill, Jump Around for House of Pain, the stuff with Law, the Dark Man, on and on and on, Funk Dubious, to be partnering with Madlib. That's not something I saw coming. The album drops very soon, April 7th. It's called Champagne for Breakfast. And, there has been some stuff on social, but this week they released Wild Salmon, which, keeps in line with the Mayhem Loren, food references and stuff like that. But this is absolutely a project that I'm going to keep an ear on because I really like the Derringer and Mayhem. To me, that was his best body of work to date. And when you're working with Muggs and Madlib, like, you've got my attention.
Yeah, for sure. Looking forward to that project. So what's your song of the week?
Man, you were there. I regret not being there. We talked about it in our last episode during the De La Soul party at Webster Hall. I think it was Stretch Armstrong was one of the originals, played To the Max by Steezo. And, Steezo's album, produced by Paul C. in part, to me is one of those underground hip hop classic albums. People know Freak the Funk and, the other joints, but To the Max, I've been playing all week, and just it brings the joy and my love of hip hop out of me. So I've been playing that one. I know it's not new, but if folks out there haven't heard it, give it a spin. What about you?
So you talked about Alchemist, and folks who have listened to us know that we are like fiends for Alchemist. He is always on our playlist as well, his productions. I got an Alchemist playlist called Chemistry. I could send that to you too. It's updating, rolling, updated. But every year he does 2 or 3 projects with a single artist. He did one with Currency last year, and I think Freddie Gibbs the year before that, and Boldy James has done a bunch. It
Yeah.
seems like he has a project coming on the way with Larry June, because they've released 2 songs together, and the latest one is called 89 Earthquake, which is on our Spotify playlist. That one has been heavy rotation for me. Super dope. Larry June has become one of my favorite artists that I've discovered in the last like 2 to 3 years. Just kind of creeped up on the scene for me, but got that laid back West Coast kind of vibe, like super chill, almost like a Dom Kennedy, but to me, like, but really, really dope. I just love his flow, and Over Alchemist is just banging to me. So
Yeah, man. Larry, I did his bio sometime during the pandemic. Might have been 20, might have been 21. Cool guy, super inspirational. And he's been, like you said, I mean, he was in the paint for a while, but finally getting his recognition, and very, very prolific. And yeah, Alchemist produced on his album last year. But that is the one, like, and I'm so glad you added it to the playlist, because when I heard it, I was like, there's more in store for sure.
yeah, for sure. Well, yo, man, until we do it again.
Man, yeah, I really appreciate it. I wish you happy St. Patrick's Day once more. And for everybody, if you made it this far, please give us a like, give us a comment, please subscribe. We do this because of you. And until we do it again,
Peace, man.
peace.